If your limited company owes HMRC money, you're probably worried about what HMRC can actually do to your limited company. And the main questions directors have on this subject is, can HMRC actually shut my limited company down? Now remember, there is a clear ladder of escalation that HMRC will work up before they get to the point of forcing your company into liquidation. And there are ways out at every single stage. And there is a specific window even after the worst step is taken when you can still pull the situation back. Well, sometimes. I also need to warn you, there is a moment in this process that will catch you out like it does every other director. And that's the point where the real damage starts, and it is a lot earlier than most of you guys and girls think. But the short answer is, yeah, HMRC can close your limited company down. But that's just the headline. HMRC shut down thousands of companies every year, and in 2026 they're doing it more than ever, quicker than ever, and for less amounts than ever before. Now in this video I'm going to explain to you what the escalation ladder is, so you know what rung you are on, and I'm going to share with you a secret that you can use even if HMRC have formally petitioned to shut your company down, and it gives you a surprising amount of control. Most directors have got no clue what it's about. So let's start with the straight answer. Can HMRC shut your company down? Yes, the legal process is called compulsory liquidation. You'll also hear it called being wound up by the courts. And in the UK, HMRC is by far the most common creditor to use this route. But HMRC doesn't just shut companies down out of nowhere and for no reason. They follow a fairly predictable escalation ladder. And at each rung of this ladder, you've still got options. Now the directors that end up in the most trouble and they end up getting wound up are almost always the ones who just wait too long and they ignore HMRC. Now let me walk you through this ladder so you can work out exactly where you might be right now. So you've got rung one of the ladder, automated letters. So you might be late filing, you might be late paying, and HMRC has got a system and it just generates reminders, okay? This by far is the safest place to be because you're still just a case on a screen and it's usually fairly easy to fix. Then you got rung two, which is the phone calls. You start getting calls from generally an officer chasing the debt. Still fairly routine, still relatively gentle, still relatively easy to sort out. Then you've got rung three. Someone is on your doorstep, okay? And this is where it starts to feel a bit more personal. Let me tell you, nobody wants HMRC at the business premises. And much worse, nobody wants HMRC at your home. And remember, if your home is your registered address, that is where they're going to go to. Now, even at this stage, it isn't too bad as long as you can come up with a plan to pay those arrears, okay? Then you got rung four, and this is where your business assets are genuinely at risk. They're using something called a controlled goods agreement, okay? And it's where HMRC will come with a clipboard, they list all your business assets, and once you sign that bit of paperwork, they take a legal interest in those assets. So until your debts are paid, they actually own your business assets. If you don't clear these arrears in a relatively short period of time, they're going to come, they're going to return, and they will take the assets out of your business and sell them at auction, okay? Not many businesses can survive with no assets in them, all right? Then you've got rung five, winding up petition. This is where HMRC will apply to the court to shut your company down. And this is the rung most of this video is about, because this is the point where things become public, they become urgent, and they're much harder to control. Then you've got rung six, which is the court hearing. If nothing has been resolved with HMRC, the court date comes and the judge will make the order for the company to be compulsory wound up. This is a disaster for most people. And the key point for everyone who's watching this, at every rung before rung four, you've got room to move. Deals can be done. Arrangements can be made, advice can be taken. But the longer you wait, the fewer options you have. And once you hit rung 5, those options shrink fast. Now, I spoke to a director a few months ago, genuinely didn't know what rung he was on. He basically ignored HMRC for almost a year, stopped opening letters. And when we finally spoke to him, we're like, listen, get them letters out that you've got. Let's have a look at exactly where you're at. And he was already past rung 4. Enforcement had been to his premises. And this, I think, was a bit sneaky. He'd signed something without reading it properly. The agent basically says, oh, it's just part of the process. You know, sign this to say we've been sort of thing. And it was a Control the Goods Act, okay? But then he still did nothing. And a petition got prepared. And then it landed on the doorstep. So the practical takeaway here is where you are on HMRC's ladder determines what you can do next. If you have been avoiding letters, do this right now. Pull them out, open them, put them in date order and work out where you actually are. Because the right move at rung 2 will not work if you're at rung 5. And knowing the rung that you're on is the first step to getting the situation under control. Now listen, if anything I've said to you so far has thought, oh, I might need to speak to these lot, I've pricked your conscience, you've got issues with HMRC. If you go to the description, the top link, put your details in, one of my team will call you today. We've got over 760 5-star reviews on Trustpilot, more than anyone else in our industry by a country mile, okay? One of my team will call you today, free, confidential and independent. And if you're watching it and thinking, well, I am a bit worried, but I don't want to talk to someone, I kind of get that, right? I will give you a free guide on insolvency that will answer all of your questions, but I want your email address to stay in touch with you. And that's the link, the second link in the description, okay? Let's get back to the video. Right, the good news is, for the first 4 rungs of this ladder, there's usually a sensible deal that can be done with HMRC. And it's genuinely a time to pay arrangement, and that will take you off the ladder completely. And to be fair, it's the move HMRC wants you to make. Now, a time to pay arrangement, right, is simply a deal with HMRC to clear what you owe them in affordable instalments over extended terms. And in some cases, it can be multiple years. If you set this up properly, it's the off-ramp from that escalation ladder, and it can genuinely sort issues out and allow you to get your business back on track. Now, I have done loads of videos on time to pay arrangements, so I'm going to keep this one really tight. There are 3 things that usually decide whether HMRC will say yes, okay? First of all, you've got to be up to date with your filings. Every return needs submitting, even the ones that you can't pay yet. HMRC are not going to agree to a payment plan while you've got returns outstanding. So before you even pick the phone up to them, get your VAT returns up to date, get your corporation tax in, get your PAYE submissions in. Everything needs to be filed, okay? Secondly is the numbers that you are offering as a repayment have to be realistic. I don't want you to be setting up a time to pay arrangement just to make HMRC happy, and I see it all the time. HMRC might say to you, well, I want it in 12 months. You know you can't pay it in 12 months, but you agree, okay? You've got to work out your cash flow, what's coming in, what's going out, and offer a number to HMRC that can be paid even on a bad month. Because the day you miss a time to pay payment is the day the agreement gets pulled and you're straight back on the ladder, usually a couple of rungs up, okay? So mega, mega important. And 3, present a business case to HMRC. Your job is to show them, listen, you're going to recover more money by working with us than forcing us into an insolvency process. Now, it can't be a threat, but it's the commercial reality. And HMRC knows this. You just need to present it calmly and cleanly. Tell them what's gone on. Why are you in arrears? What's going to change to ensure you're not in this position in the future? And it'd be really helpful if you've got that cash flow to share with them. I mean, I'll talk to you about a director I worked. Let's call him Sam, okay? He was already at rung 3. Now, an enforcement officer had been to his unit And this was what caused him to speak to us. And what we did is we put together a proper proposal, real cash flow numbers, and HMRC at first said, listen, we're not going to give you more than 12 months. By the end of it, they'd accepted a 3-year arrangement, and the escalation stopped immediately. The pressure come off Sam, and the company stayed alive. In fact, it's not just stayed alive, it's thriving now. And that's the off-ramp. It can exist right up to the point HMRC files a winding up petition. Now, the directors who get the best outcomes here are the ones who treat HMRC like what they are. They're a creditor that just wants paying. They're not the enemy that needs to be outsmarted. And the takeaway to this point is a time to pay arrangement is the practical exit from the ladder. But file the returns first. Make sure the offer that you make to HMRC is realistic, even on a bad month, and present a calm business case. And if you're on rungs 1 to 4, this should be on the table right now, before HMRC even considers the next step. Because once a winding up petition is filed, everything that I've talked about gets much harder very quickly, and some of those options are out the window altogether. Which brings me to what rung 5 actually looks like. So let's talk about it. The winding up petition. This is what I mentioned at the start of the video, and this is where the damage starts before you ever get to court. And most directors seriously underestimate it. Like a winding up petition, in plain English, is HMRC going to court and asking the judge to shut a company down. They've decided that informal recovery isn't working, and they want a judge to place the company into compulsory liquidation. But they've gone through all these rungs of the escalation ladder, and they've got to the point going, we're banging our head against a brick wall with this company. Now, technically, the legal threshold to present a winding up petition is fairly low. You only have to owe over 750 quid of undisputed debt. Now, in practice, HMRC, let's go back a couple of years. I think they won't, well, they never used to wind people up for less than 100 grand. That was the truth, and it took years to come to fruition. I promise you guys, that has changed. They are petitioning faster, and I've seen petitions go in for 35 grand, okay? That never, ever used to happen. Now, the bit that catches director out is, I mean, a petition is bad, right? But it's not the catastrophic disaster if it's from HMRC. The real damage to your business is what happens after it's filed and before it gets to court. Because once HMRC files, the petition gets advertised in the Gazette. It's basically an official public record. And that advert is the moment the situation goes from serious to absolutely out of control. And I'll tell you why. The bank sees it and your business account gets frozen. It's not restricted, it's frozen. You cannot use it. You can't pay wages, you can't pay suppliers. And in some cases, you won't even be able to receive money in. And this is the part that people are like, well, I didn't know that that was going to happen. But the bank are doing that to stop you emptying the bank account. Now, the next thing is your suppliers are definitely going to find out, because there's credit reference agencies, they'll pick it up and they'll let your suppliers know. So any payment terms you've got with these suppliers is very likely to turn to cash on delivery overnight. And don't be surprised if some people stop supplying you altogether. It's not just your suppliers either. Your customers can find out. Now, if a customer sees you've got a live winding up a petition against your company, their head is going to be spinning thinking, well, they're not going to be able to deliver what I've asked for next month. They're going to pause your contracts. Loads of orders will get cancelled. Like, the word is going to spread like wildfire. And by the time you actually get to your court date, the business is already past the point of no return. It's in pieces because the petition has now gone public. And that's the moment I flagged at the start of the video. It's not the hearing. It's not like the order of the liquidation. It's the advertisement of the petition. That is the trigger that sets off the bank, the suppliers, the customers. And the takeaway is this. Even if you get a winding up petition, right, it's not just a form on a court file. It is a public warning flare that will cause immediate catastrophic damage, which is why the worst thing you can do is not do anything and wait for the court date. If you've been served with a petition, stop. If you've got a petition on your door today or someone is threatening you, Pick the flipping phone up. It doesn't have to be to me. You might not like me. That's okay. But you have to speak to somebody immediately. Which brings me to what you can actually do if you've got a petition, right? Because there's a gap. The days between the petition landing and the hearing happening, at the moment, I mean, this is probably going to go out in July 2026, sort of 6 to 8 weeks, the courts are clogged up. That gap is not a dead zone. For someone who's got a petition, it's the most important window in the entire process. And there are specific moves that you can make that lots of directors don't realise exist, okay? So, when a winding up petition lands, a lot of people will think, right, it's over. Game over. Never going to get through this. You wait for the hearing, the order gets made, and that's that. And lots of directors do that. Like they just think the petition's landed, it's over. And they shouldn't. Now, that gap between the petition being filed and the court hearing date, as I say, about 6 to 8 weeks, maybe a bit longer, that is the window you can still make decisions that will change the outcome to a degree, right? Now, the main options are, I'm going to say it, obviously it might be a stupid option, is you pay them in full. If the debt can be cleared with HMRC, they will withdraw the petition once it's paid. It's not always an automatic withdrawal. They might want some interest, they might want some cost too. But if the funds are genuinely available, that is obviously the cleanest way to sort it out. Option 2, this is possible in certain circumstances. It's where you apply for a validation order, basically to keep trading. A lot of directors don't understand that this exists, but once a petition's filed, payments made out of the company can be challenged later, which is why banks will often freeze the accounts. Now, a validation order is the court giving permission to the company to keep using its bank account for essential payments, things like payroll, rent, key suppliers, while the petition is dealt with. Now, it's important, a validation order does not make the petition disappear, but it can keep the business functioning long enough for you to execute a plan. You're going to need an insolvency lawyer to do that. We can introduce you to one if you need, okay? Now, option 3, now this is if you've got no hope of recovery, you can't pay the HMRC back in full, okay? You go into voluntary liquidation before the court winds you up, okay? Yeah, the company might be heading for liquidation either way, but how it happens really matters. With a voluntary liquidation, you appoint an insolvency practitioner of your choosing, okay? It's not the official receiver. You've got more control over timing and how things are going to be handled. And you usually have got a better chance to plan around things like, well, staff redundancy, overdrawn loan accounts, asset valuations, and where appropriate, you can even buy the assets back as long as it's a fair market value into a new company. With compulsory liquidation, all that control disappears. I will give you a real example. Okay, call him Tom. Tom got a petition for 150 grand. He'd not paid the VAT and PAYE, and he'd ignored things for far too long. HMRC was just escalating in the background. And by the time he came to us, the petition was filed and it was advertised. His bank account was frozen. The hearing was literally 3 weeks away. Now, we moved really quickly. First thing we did is we went through his options. What is it he's hoping to achieve here? And the business, it was over. So it was a voluntary liquidation that we needed. But because the petition was live, we needed to get a solicitor to speak to HMRC and request that HMRC withdraw from the petition to allow the director to put the company into voluntary liquidation. And in most cases, they'll do this as long as you pay HMRC's petitioning costs, which I think are about 900 quid at the moment. Now, the solicitor you engage with will want some money to do it. They might charge 1,000, 1,500, two grand to deal with HMRC, send a barrister down to the court date to speak to the judge. But it's mega important that you do that step. Now, because we was able to get the business into voluntary liquidation on a short notice period, Tom was able to choose an IP, okay? We told him about his overdrawn director's loan account, gone through his incoming and outgoings, his asset realisation position, and we give him a good indication what an in-principle settlement is going to look like on his director's loan account, okay? Then, when the insolvency practitioner was appointed, he had the assets valued properly, and Tom was able to legitimately buy the assets back at a fair market value and continue trading in the new company. And by the time that hearing date had arrived, the company was already into voluntary liquidation and HMRC withdrawn. The petition was effectively redundant. Now, if we'd have waited for the compulsory winding up, the official receiver would have been appointed. It would have been a nightmare for staff being made redundant. There'd been no choice, far less room to negotiate or plan. The difference for Tom was night and day. And the takeaway is this: a winding up petition isn't the end. It's like a big deadline. And if you've been served with one, your moves are limited, but they are, you pay it, you get a validation order to keep essential payments moving, you do a voluntary liquidation instead of being forced up by the courts. Or I suppose you could look at a CVA. And a CVA is where you put together a plan to pay your unsecured creditors over a longer period of time, generally 5 years. But let me tell you, if HMRC have gone to the buggerance of actually giving a winding up petition to your company, the chances of them accepting a CVA are fairly limited, right? The directors who get the worst outcomes in these scenarios, they treat the petition as the end, okay? Like they get the petition, they panic, they freeze, they take far too many bits of advice and end up doing nothing. The ones who get the best outcomes treat it as like, this is the last moment I have to act. And that brings me on to the final piece. Because the reason these options matter is what's going to happen to you if you don't use them. Being compulsory shut down by the court isn't just one ending. In most cases, it is the worst ending available, and I want to tell you why. A lot of directors assume the difference between compulsory liquidation and voluntary liquidation is paperwork, and actually, compulsory liquidation, I don't have to pay anyone's fees. Either way, the company is going to be finished. So why does it matter how I get there? It matters in 5 very, very specific ways. And I have seen the difference up close and personal for years. First of all, you lose control who's running the liquidation. You have got an ability to appoint an insolvency practitioner. By the way, I'm not an insolvency practitioner. I've never sat my exam, but I have dealt with thousands of insolvencies. There are some really good insolvency practitioners out there, and in a voluntary liquidation, if you choose one, you can pick someone who understands the situation, you can bring them up to speed, you can find someone who communicates properly with you and will actually work with you to get things done. In a compulsory liquidation, the court appoints the official receiver. It's dead slow. You don't choose them. You can't swap them. And you've got far less influence over how the whole thing is handled. And it's handled, in my opinion, at a snail's pace. Brings me on to the next thing. A compulsory liquidation, your conduct review is going to be a lot tougher. Now, please understand me. Every liquidation involves a review of the director's conduct. And there is a review, an investigation that's sent to the insolvency service. But when it's compulsory, the fact that it's actually got to a point of being compulsory is going to be viewed as a sign that you didn't act early enough. Remember, the minute you become insolvent, with no realistic hope of recovery, your job is to make the position of your creditors not worse. And one of the options is taking insolvency advice. Now, if you've got wound up, right, you've obviously ignored that big change in your responsibilities. Now, it doesn't automatically mean wrongdoing. But in real life, the official receiver is going to think this person has clearly not done what they were meant to do. The higher risk. I'm going to give it more scrutiny, and there's more chance of you being disqualified than if you'd done it voluntarily. Another thing to think about is that assets often realise a lot less in compulsory liquidation. The official receiver might be managing a huge number of cases. They don't know your business. They're not really going to be able to maximise the value in the way a chosen IP will often will. And they tend to dispose of assets quickly through auction routes, okay? In a voluntary process, an IP can take a more considered approach. And if it's appropriate, there's more scope for a proper valuation and legitimate options where you, the director, could potentially buy the assets back. Obviously, it has to be a fair value. And that means better realisations for creditors. Now, another point is you've got far less room to deal with personal exposure. In a voluntary liquidation, you can be aware of your PGs, you can understand what your director's loan accounts is, you can start to work with someone like us to understand how you'd handle that. In a compulsory route, it's just harder to deal with. It's slower. The conversation is going to be much narrower with the official receiver, and they're much less flexible. I've seen directors stuck in drawn out, overdrawn directors' loan investigations and eventual settlements that go on back and forth for years and years and years. You just lose all agency, and it's going to, I promise you, compulsory is going to hit you harder than you expect. Now, for me, listen, when my company had to go for insolvency, I made plenty of mistakes, but one thing I did do right, and it was almost by accident, is I chose to put the company into liquidation rather than waiting to be wound up. And at the time, I didn't fully understand the difference. I just couldn't face waiting around for a court to actually drop the hammer on me. And what that gave me was huge. I dealt with an IP who I was chosen. I was treated like a person. I had room to plan for afterwards. And I had something important to hold on to. The knowledge that when it mattered, I actually did act. Directors who get compulsory wound up, they don't get that. They get told by the court that the company's over, and the official receiver, they're on them. The conduct review, the asset sale, any personal fallout, it happens on someone else's terms. And it's the big difference. Same endpoint, okay? Completely different journey and a completely different place to come out the other side. So the takeaway is this: being shut down by HMRC isn't just one of the endings. In most cases, it's the worst ending available. Less control, tougher scrutiny, weaker asset outcomes for creditors, and far less room to manage personal consequences. If you're anywhere on this escalation ladder, and especially if a petition is even a possibility, the single most important thing you can do today is act while you still get to choose the route. Voluntary always beats compulsory. Now, I'm glad you watched the video. I hope you found it useful. Give me a comment. I'll reply to it personally. Book a call if you want to speak to someone. But if you're having some problems with HMRC and you want to know exactly how do I set up a time to pay arrangement, Chris, go and watch this video about how you set up a time to pay arrangement. It'll tell you what to do, what to say, what not to say, how to plan it properly. And our hope is you'll be able to do this yourself. Thank you.